Hello, everyone. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Management and Professional Networks for William & Mary. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Day 2 of William & Mary's 5th Annual Professional Development Week. This year's programming is intended for the whole William & Mary community of students, alumni, faculty, staff, parents, and friends. We will cover a variety of topics relevant to people at all points of their career journey, and our discussions are rooted in the National Association of Colleges and Employers Career Competencies. Career and self-development, communication, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. We are truly grateful for the continued engagement of our William & Mary community to support one another's professional success. And I want to acknowledge and thank all the William & Mary Professional Networks leaders, speakers, and William & Mary colleagues who provided the guidance, support, and expertise to make this week possible. I'd like to specifically thank Kelly O'Shaughnessy, Associate Director of Career Engagement, who partnered with me this year to curate a week of relevant events and learning objectives for our William & Mary community. We began the week by focusing on the importance of growing your brand and LinkedIn tricks to recession-proof your career. Today, we will begin with a panel of HR leaders discussing the workforce trends impacting careers in today's changing economy. And later this afternoon, we will have executive coach and leadership consultant Terry McDougall lead us through a series of exercises that will help us gain clarity on our values, strengths, and skills. Before I turn things over to our panel, I just have a few technology items to cover. Today's session is being recorded, and we will notify all registrants once the recording is available. Questions are welcome, and we will address as many questions as time will allow. If you roll over the bottom portion of the Zoom window, you should see a Q&A icon appear. Please use that feature to submit your questions. We will monitor the Q&A and chat throughout the hour. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Latoya, Clarke, Kristen, and Kelsey. I provided bios on the registration page, so for the interest of time, I'm just going to do a brief introduction of our panelists. I'm sure their experiences and expertise will be incorporated into their remarks throughout the hour. Latoya Asia is responsible for developing and driving talent acquisition, workforce planning development, diversity and equity inclusion, and employee engagement strategies to promote a diverse and inclusive work culture that attracts and retains the best and brightest to Dominion Energy. Next is Clarke Havener. Clarke is a partner at Odgers Berndtson with their aerospace, defense, and national security practice. Clarke is based in Odgers Berndtson's Washington, D.C. office. Next is Kristen Vaughan. Kristen is a managing director at Accenture Federal Services, leading the operations growth platform. Prior to that role, she led their human capital practice. Next, we have Kelsey Weissgold. Kelsey currently serves as the global lead for IBM's Alumni program. She is passionate about creating opportunities and connections for job seekers, particularly working with early career talent. I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today to discuss careers in today's changing economy. I'm going to now pass the microphone to Kristen to begin the conversation and kick off the group with some questions. Thank you all.
Thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Professional Development Week, Day 2. I hope you're having an amazing week. We are all excited to be here and really to help you grow and develop in your careers, whether it's you're in high school, college, or you're looking for a job and you've had 20 or 30 years in the working environment. We want to make this impactful and meaningful for you. So what I'd like to do is today start off with a question for our panelists, more just describing your, number one, your major at William & Mary, and then your career journey. So kind of the key highlights and maybe a few bumps on the road too. So Kelsey, I'll start out with you. You're up top of my screen.
Sure, happy to kick off. So hi, everybody. My name is Kelsey Weissgold. I'm a William & Mary graduate from 2011, and I majored in marketing and received a minor in art, and had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. So my career path was completely unknown when I left the walls of William & Mary. But I did start my career in federal consulting, and then I pivoted completely to move into talent acquisition, which is where I've been working for the past 10 years or so. I'm at IBM now, and I've been here for 7 years. The majority of my career has been focused on building strategy for early talent. So that's our interns and new hires that are coming from colleges and universities. I grew from a role in campus recruiting where I was showing up at career fairs and talking with students on campus to leading more of a strategy perspective for our North America recruitment teams. And then I had a really awesome stint working on a global team where I was able to bring standards and best practices to how IBM recruits globally. And then I did a career pivot again. So I am now still at IBM, but in a role focused on building a network and community for our former IBMers, our alumni network, help them stay connected to the company even after they've left. So that's me.
Thanks, Kelsey. Clarke, do you want to go next?
Sure. Clarke Havener, class of 1980. I was an English major. My entire academic career was spent on, I wanted to go into publishing. On graduation, I got a job, Prentice Hall, the publishing company, and absolutely hated it. And so I spent the next 3 or 4 years kind of wandering in different geographies and different kinds of jobs, but I wound up doing business and loan restructuring for Wells Fargo Bank, which I enjoyed. I came back east with the intention of going to business school at William & Mary, and happened to speak to a friend who was doing executive recruiting. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to where he worked, and I sort of understudied him for a week or so and found out that it was something that I really enjoyed doing. I wound up starting my own firm, which I merged with a firm called Russell Reynolds Associates. And then from Russell Reynolds, I spent 10 years at Russell Reynolds, and then I accepted a job as the head of the aerospace and defense sector at the world's largest executive search firm, Korn Ferry International. And then I took early retirement from Korn Ferry 3 years ago and joined a bunch of friends at a company called Odgers Berndtson, which is actually the 6th largest firm, but it's better known in Europe than it is here. We've just begun building the North American operations. And I focus mostly on CEO search for mid-sized companies in the defense and national security area, as well as board searches.
Excellent. Thanks, Clarke. Latoya?
Hello, good afternoon. I was about to say good morning. This day is flying. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Latoya Asia, and as mentioned by Michael in the beginning, I'm currently at Dominion Energy, working in HR. But my career, starting from the time of graduation at William & Mary, I did go to the law school there and graduated in 2009. And it's interesting just hearing, everyone else's background, because I think the common theme is kind of the unknown, or maybe thinking you might want to do one thing and maybe not knowing what that looks like. But I did take a course in law school on employment law, fell in love with it, and that's what I ended up doing at a firm for several years after law school. And in the middle of that, probably 3 years into my practice, I had really received a calling, felt very strongly spiritually to do a missionary trip, a long-term. I did a year in Niger, in Niamey, Niger, West Africa, which a lot of people thought I was crazy at that time. I'd been working at this big firm for 3 years, kind of the ideal role for some people coming out of law school. Certainly was a great experience, but I just felt at that time that's what I needed to be doing. So I spent a year teaching at a K through 12 school, specifically 9th through 12th grade, 3 different courses, and just loved it. It was an amazing experience. I ended up going back to the same firm. They were gracious enough and had let me know that they would have an available spot for me if I wanted to come back. So I did that, but I knew kind of deep down that I wanted, just from the experience I had at the firm, and then of course that incredible experience in Niger, I knew that I wanted to do something where I was having more of a direct impact on people, and just doing it in a way where I could develop those relationships a little bit more strongly. At the firm, you're kind of representing different companies, and so you never really quite get those deeper levels of interaction. So I knew I wanted to do something kind of like in-house, or non-legal, and do that in a way that could connect me to people. So I ended up going into HR. So it was my first non-legal HR role. I went to a company that was headquartered in Richmond, and spent 2 years doing strategic HR work, but really kind of covering everything from recruiting all the way up through strategic, business discussions with leaders, mostly in supply chain and the services functions. And then from there, I ended up going to a financial services company, E-Trade, which is now owned by Morgan Stanley. And I went in-house as an employment lawyer there. And so I really was able to combine a lot of course, the outside firm experience, working in a non-legal HR role, and really understanding and speaking HR language and understanding what was meant when we were having discussions. So that was really beneficial. And then I moved over to this role in 2020, which is leading talent acquisition and workforce planning and development. And last year taking on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so really just driving all of those functions for the business, and for all of you, the panelists, but also those in the audience who might do work in talent acquisition or diversity, equity, and inclusion at this time. This is a very challenging moment in time to do all of that work. So it's been incredibly rewarding. I do feel like I've found my sweet spot. If I look back, I would have never been able to conjure up like exactly what role would be the best fit, but I do feel that this type of work is really the most impactful for me so far in my career.
That's amazing. Thanks, Latoya. Thanks for sharing. And hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Vaughan. I graduated in 2000. I was an information technology major at William & Mary. And I started my career out at Arthur Andersen doing IT consulting. That's kind of what I wanted to do. And it kind of morphed into, I worked for a few smaller companies after that. And I found myself writing code, and which I liked, but I didn't want to do as my job. I remember waking up several nights and being like, having these dreams that my code wouldn't compile, like my SQL script wasn't working right. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I figured out the problem, how to solve it. And I remember thinking like, God, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Did I pick a bad major? Like, why, what am I doing? And as I looked at it, I actually thought I was going to become a personal trainer. I was like, well, I like to work out. Maybe I should do that. That wasn't really what I wanted to do. I think I just wanted to be around people. And so what I decided to do was kind of take my love of technology and passion for people and kind of work in the consulting area and really move more into working with clients and people more to understand processes and technology and help explain that to them and help kind of deliver these changes. So I've been with Accenture for 19 years. I started off in their technology group. I've done strategy consulting and I now lead our operations practice. And it's funny, I've done kind of the total 180 in my career of like different types of things where it's strategy, it's deep technology, it's running these long-term major programs for agencies and companies. And I think the common thread is just the people that I work with. I like finding new challenges and solving problems. And I think that I need to continually be challenged to find what I really enjoy doing. And I think, I can't believe I've been at Accenture this long, but I think that I never really thought I knew what I wanted to do, but I like the ability to keep on finding new things and finding challenges and passion and working with new people and new clients. And so I think that, pulling all those threads around like career pivots and finding your passion, I think it's really about finding those things that, the best coaching I've received is like, people ask you, what are you doing when you lose track of time? And that's really powerful. If you sit back and think about it, like, what are you doing when you lose track of time? Because that's what you're really passionate about, right? The time just flies by. You're like, oh my gosh, that was 3 hours. I thought it was 30 minutes. And so I think just kind of keeping that in your mind of all these stories, right? Of all of us on the panel, just kind of think about, what your passion is. It sounds like everyone has found that, or maybe they're still finding it. And I think today is about, uncovering those things where all of our career paths are not linear. Sometimes you push the pause button. Sometimes you push the stop button. Sometimes it's a rewind. And so it depends on where you're at in your career and what you're going to do. So don't think that if you're in a specific major and you're starting your first job, oh my gosh, I have to do this for the rest of my life. Or you're, not really sure what you want to do. That's okay too. You could be any type of major and any type of background and go and have a successful career in something that's totally different than what your major is. So I don't think that, making sure you're not stressing out about that is a really important part of it, I think. So, we've heard a lot today about just kind of career pivots and paths. And my next question for the panel is really, talking about finding a job or looking for employment or seeking out new employees in today's economy. The last few years since COVID, gosh, it's been about 3 years, right? Have really flown by. And it's not that I loved what I'm doing because I lose track of time because of COVID. It's more, it just seems like you lose track because there's nothing to benchmark those things on. We've had quiet quitting. A remote workforce now. We've had a hybrid workforce, a blended workforce, return to office. There's a lot of layoffs out there right now. Employee experience is really big. How do we blend, at-home workforce with people that are in the office and make sure everyone has the same experience? So I guess my question for the panel, with all of that going on, what do you look for in an employee, or what do you look for in a company and in today's economy, in today's society? What are you looking for if you're looking to hire someone in a job?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I would say, I guess, two different answers on looking for, what I would be looking for, what, I would encourage people to look at. I mean, you all have probably heard, it's kind of like a date, right? You're kind of interviewing each other and dating each other and trying to figure out the synergy, because you could look at a website, you could, see maybe some things that the company's doing. But, unless you really have those conversations and ask the questions, particularly on those things that are important to you. So I know one area for me, when I think about if I'm interviewing with a company, diversity, equity, inclusion is very important to me. DE&I means something very different for different people. Sometimes things, one or more of those things might be emphasized or not. So for me, particularly inclusion, right? That feeling like, we're not just looking at representation. You're not just showing me numbers like, oh, look, we have, we're such a diversified workforce. Well, are those people at the table making decisions? Who's on the leadership team? What, kind of resources do you have for people in the company, particularly for those in underrepresented community? So for me, that's something that's very important, and you really can't get details on those things unless you're really asking questions. So, if I'm looking for a job, that's something that's important. Of course, I would encourage, others if that's something important to you as well. But really, the biggest thing I would say on both ends is just the culture. Like, what is the culture? What's the environment? We have seen, just as Kristen has mentioned, with all the changes, there's a lot happening. We are seeing a lot of different expectations from people coming in. And I know, Kelsey, you'll probably speak, especially having the connection with the younger or the more junior talent, people coming straight from college. Their expectations are very different. And I think it's good, right? That what they're looking for, what they're seeking, what they're demanding is very different. And that it really is causing companies to really have to rethink and relook at what we're offering and what is our culture and how do we communicate that. If you were to ask people at a water cooler what that is it different? Is that good? Is that bad? So that's what I would say. Just really finding what's important to you and making sure that you get the answers that you're seeking, and it may not align with what you want, and that's important, obviously, in your decision making.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in. I want to strongly echo that culture point, Latoya, because I feel like it's a hard thing to encapsulate, and it's so much more than just a company having like a really slick looking careers page, and so much more than like your talent marketing team posting really cool TikToks. Like it's more than that. Does it align to your goals, your personal values, like your beliefs? And I think the only way to really get this, besides the external communications a company puts out, is if you get to a point where you can have an interview with a company and a team, it's asking those pointed questions to as many people as you can, and asking for, my experience is asking for like a direct, tangible example of how your interviewee has seen the culture for them. How has the company supported their growth and development? If that's an element of a culture, it's important to you. Do they have a personal example they can share? How does the company encourage diversity and inclusion? Like, tell me how you've seen that on your team. So I think you have to do the legwork as a candidate or an applicant to really learn about the culture. But that's I think the number one answer for me by far is like, what am I looking for? If I'm looking for an employer, it's the culture. And then as a company looking to seek candidates and find top talent, it's being sure we can communicate our culture to them very clearly as well.
This is Clarke. I get called in by companies that, they're large companies that have very well-defined culture, to very small, sometimes pre-revenue companies that are, engaged in a particular area of technology that they're looking to develop. And without a doubt, culture is the most important factor for success of the senior executive, because you can look at sort of a portfolio of skills and experiences in the background of an individual. But if they're not able to adapt to the culture, it almost always winds up not being a great fit. And having done 700 or 800 searches over my career, I've seen times when it's been great fits and times when it hasn't been. And the determinative factor is almost always the culture and the inability or the ability of the executive to understand the culture, embrace it, and set about recommending changes once they understand the culture and why companies do things.
Right. What about a question for you guys too? As I think about the audience on the phone, and if they're looking for a job right now, how in today's economy, right? There's layoffs, there's hiring freezes. How do people differentiate? How do they, if they get a one-on-one interview with you, right? You're doing a closing interview. How do they really nail that interview and have you walk away saying, wow, like they are a great fit? The culture, yes, but what else can they do to really differentiate? Is there any like one or two tips you would give?
For me, so this is a concept, but I think if you can weave it into your interviews, it lands very well in my experience. It's this concept of learning agility, which proves us that you are adaptable, you're willing to learn. Maybe you don't have every single qualification we're looking for on the job description, which is the job description is probably unrealistic anyways, but you have made it this far and you're showing and demonstrating your ability to learn and grow and change. So someone who's flexible, approaching new things, if weave that into any closing conversation you have, and I think that's a ticket right there.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I was going to actually say something similar in the sense of, I know folks that I've interviewed or just been a part of decision making, when someone feels almost too firm, not firm, but when they feel like there's only like one thing they want to do and they feel very strongly about that, while it's great, right? Sometimes I wish that, I had that, from earlier in my career where it's like, okay, this is it. And then that's what I ended up doing forever. We know that that's not necessarily realistic. And because of all the changes within the workplace, we do want, someone who's going to be flexible. And I would say also when someone, is a little bit more vulnerable and just kind of sharing like, the things that they're passionate about or things that maybe aren't always connected to the work itself, but just more about themselves and not obviously personal details or, I definitely don't want to hear, certain information, but when they're just more relatable and they feel it's more of a conversation. So it's kind of that, age old phrase of, if you're stuck in an elevator with someone, is it someone that you feel like you can travel with and be, and really just being more personable and be really opening up. And I know it's challenging in an environment, in an interview, because normally you're nervous and, it's really challenging to do that. But I think I like to see that people are kind of confident in themselves and confident in, being able to learn and wanting to grow and all of those things. But just having that conversation, I think is, or more of a conversation like interview is something that stands out to me.
Yeah, Latoya, I agree with that completely. I feel like I think back on the kind of the final interviews that I do, and it's more, I'm not asking specific questions about their experience or their skills, their resume. I really, at that point, they've passed the test. It's more, can you hold a conversation? Are you engaging? Do we connect? Are you going to fit culturally? And a lot of times, I'm really impressed when someone's like, well, I looked at your website and your core values are X, Y, and Z. Here's how I think I play those out in real life, or things that show they've done the research. I think is really important, because there's so many people that I'll ask and say, what interests you about Accenture or IBM or whatever? And their response is, I don't really know. I probably need to look into that. It's like, well, if you're at this point, right, you should have an answer for that. So I'd say like number one, like make sure you do your homework, and that should be like table stakes. But make sure you do your homework, and then have that conversation, be relatable. Because like, again, it's a point where an interview is also about assessing how you're going to fit into the organization and work in a team atmosphere, most likely. So I think that's really important to make sure that you show that you are collaborative and you are engaging, and you're a good communicator. So I'd say those things are important as well.
Yeah, and when in doing searches, I mean, one of the things that we tend to look for in people, and that clients tend to look for, people that have sought out new opportunities in their career and that have challenged themselves and that have kind of looked at their careers being a portfolio of skills rather than just kind of linear advancement. People that have taken on international assignments, otherwise worked across different functions, is always good, much like Latoya has migrated into talent from the legal profession. And then people that, are active in their community and that do other things that help to build and burnish their brand, speaking, volunteer activities, things like that are important in understanding the whole person.
Yeah, I love that, Clarke. I think that's absolutely in line. Thank you all for your responses. I think that's been really helpful. Part of what we're talking about is making sure that people are focused, and then it's also not just about finding the next job, but how do you grow your career, right? So it's a long journey, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So making sure you're thinking about not just that next job, and maybe it is right now because you don't know what you want to do. So it's kind of thinking through, what is your career trajectory? What do you want to do? And understanding that the next job might not be the final job or kind of the end state, but it's going to help you get there. And everyone's different, right? Sometimes you have to find a job and you don't want to do it, and you have to take that job or that role. But kind of thinking ahead of planning on what is your, 1, 3, 5-year career plan, I think is really helpful. And sometimes that's hard to do when you don't know what you want to do. But other times it might help you think about, how can I move or pivot to that next role to help me get to what I want to really do? So I guess, as I think through, career advice and building your career, I'd love to ask the panelists, what have you found most helpful in building your career? Are there specific things or things that you have done? And I know a lot of you mentioned in your intros taking like a break or doing a 180. Is there something really specific in your career or some advice you can give on like what you did to really help build and grow your career and excel?
Kelsey?
Clarke, did you? Oh, sorry. I don't know who's starting.
Please go.
I'm happy. I was just going to say, and this may be consistent, or at least one thing for all of us, but I think having mentor or mentors, and someone that you can kind of bounce some things, and like a personal board of directors, people that you can talk through, because and I think, Clarke, you mentioned it, you went into your first role, you thought, oh, this is something I'm really passionate about, and then you ended up hating it. And so one, being able to kind of check yourself, and have a conversation with someone who's either, experienced in some other role, maybe it's the industry or maybe it's not, but just someone or someone's, multiple people that you could actually, feel comfortable having conversations, and probably more of like a personal, relationship mentor, or maybe one that's more kind of business related, so you can kind of get different perspectives. But I know for me, and I'm very vulnerable in this moment, that, there were times I didn't see in myself what others saw in me, right? So here I am in these roles, and opportunities would come up, and I'm thinking like, not me, why? I don't know that I would be a good fit for that, or maybe I won't excel in that. But somebody else was seeing something, right? They saw something that they knew that this would be a good opportunity for what I've articulated as some things that I really want to get involved in. And so even, in this current role that I'm in right now, when I joined the company, when I joined Dominion, I was in the law department. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'm in-house employment counsel. This is kind of my wheelhouse. This is wonderful. And then an opportunity came up to lead this area, right? Talent acquisition, workforce planning, now D&I. And, it was a stretch for me, because I'm like, this is, talent acquisition is a very specific, area, right? That's an area of strategy that I had never really been involved in. And the HR view that I had was more broad and general. And so I'm thinking, I'm like looking over my shoulder, but, I talked to a mentor, a couple different people about the opportunity, and what it boiled down to was, this is really going to stretch. Like, if you're feeling too comfortable, like, you maybe need to stretch and grow, and maybe take on something that is going to allow you to kind of learn and think differently. And they're like, really, it's the natural kind of leadership. Like, this is your skill. You can kind of go into any area, and it's not about being the subject matter expert or knowing everything. It's about being able to lead people and help and motivate and do all of those things. And obviously learning as you're going, and understanding and asking the questions. But I had to learn that. I mean, that was only through kind of talking to mentors, and really, because if it was just me, myself, with my own thoughts, I probably would have landed, with a different decision. So for me, in terms of career growth, it has always been having those relationships, connections, talking to people, the network. And I feel like things have just naturally flowed from there.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that mentor comment, because that was where I was going with this too. And I think I love how you phrase it, Latoya, this idea of building a personal board of directors. I think that's really key. And the way I had like a light bulb moment a few years ago when I thought of it that way, and I try to have at all times a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor, like in 3 different capacities. So the mentor is someone that I can like share their stories with, bounce ideas off of, get advice from on how they've experienced things. But then a different person sometimes for a coaching role, where they can they just probe and ask me the questions, and they help me get to an answer. So different than a mentor. And then a sponsor as someone who kind of uses their reputation or their weight or their influence to help champion for me. So I found myself building a personal board of directors in that way with these 3 different roles. And that's been a big help kind of as I grow my career.
Great.
Clarke,
Clarke, you mentioned earlier, you talked about an understudy. One of the questions in the chat was, how do you go about engaging an understudy? And is that from the employer side or the candidate side? And is that different than a shadow experience? Can you talk a little more about the understudy?
Is that me?
Yeah.
I don't remember the question, but in terms of mentoring people, Kristen?
Yeah, I think engaging like an understudy. So I think about like succession planning and how you kind of prepare like the next generation of leaders.
Oh boy, that's a big question. It's interesting. I spent 5 or 6 hours talking to the CEO of one of the major aerospace companies about their succession planning process and how they had been so methodical about it, and working with the board, and the person, the pool of people was these 5 people, and then one was picked, and the person wound up being announced as CEO designate, but then had to be let go suddenly over a workplace issue. And all of a sudden, all the succession plans were thrown up in the air. And what they had to do was scramble. And fortunately, their bench was deep enough to be able to put somebody into the position in a very quick manner. But the succession planning that we do tends to focus on sort of the top 10, 15 people at a company and helping them get ready for it through a series of exercises that not only includes competency testing and but it almost always includes, to Kelsey and Latoya's point, a lot of coaching. Almost all senior executives have coaches these days. The coaching industry is probably one of the fastest growing in human resources. And doing that informally can be just as powerful. If you get somebody who has been through certain things that, and been successful in their career, and understanding, their insight and listening and internalizing what they say. And part of that comes from just, self-awareness of your own strengths and being able to map those objectively, as objectively as possible. And sometimes a coach is able to see things that you may be blind to at the moment. Is that helpful?
I think that's a great point. And Jackie, I hope that answered your question. I think, as Clarke mentioned, like a coach, and I have a coach for myself who also went to William & Mary, by the way, who's amazing. And we talk a lot about strengths and shadows. So Jackie, I know in your question, you mentioned shadows as well. So it's those things that you can't see because you have they're in your blind spot. And I think it's understanding what those are. And I think in my career, working with, I've always thought that I need to, and you guys are all probably like this as William & Mary grads or alumni, when you get your report card or a type of performance review, you always skip on, here's what stuff I do great. What do I need to improve on? Right. I think everyone right? Because you're all high achievers.
Right.
And we always focus on what can I do better, not what I'm doing well. And I think my aha moment through part of coaching is that focus on your strengths and work in a job that focuses on bringing out the best of those things, and not in an area where they're your bottom, I'm going to call them your weaknesses. They're not, right? They're your bottom strengths, I'd call them. Where if you're really poor at, data analytics and financials, why would you take on a job that's the main focus? Why not focus on something else, right? I think we all are taught, well, I need to get in and do stuff that I'm not good at to be better. And I think with development and career building, I think it's about growth and not about change. And I'm going to say that again, I think it's so important, right? It's about growing yourself and not changing yourself.
Right.
So we're all wired differently. We all have different strengths. Focus on your strengths and finding a career that's really strong in what you like to do. You lose track of time, you're passionate about it, instead of kind of focused on the things that maybe they don't come naturally to you. And you kind of grit your teeth and do them, but you don't like it. I think we've all kind of thought, we have to work on these and develop these, but I feel like that comes into play a lot. Just look at strengths.
And that gets into career advice, and the thing that I have always internalized, and I didn't understand it at first, but finding something that you really like doing is very, very important. And I like dealing with people. I like dealing with complex problems. I like business from a standpoint of understanding it and helping organizations perform better. And that's been sort of the underpinning of my career, and it's served me very well because I've been able to combine a lot of things that I enjoy doing, and really focusing on doing the best work possible for clients.
Yeah, and one of the questions kind of goes along with that. It's ask about how do you find your passion when you have to worry about the recession and inflation, right? It's not like you can turn down 5 jobs and be like, no, those aren't what I'm passionate about. I think it's looking at your career. It's looking at it as a career, right? And it's a marathon, not necessarily the next role doesn't have to be the right role and the final role. But I'd say I tell a lot of people that I work with, if you're in a role that you don't love, do it, keep an eye out for the next role, but then find something that can complement that, whether it's volunteering in your community, if you're really passionate about that, right? Or it's participating on a sports team, or it's doing something to, outside of work that can really kind of help you kind of get that total rounded view of what you want to do. As long as your whole self has to be happy, right? We talk about balance. Everyone used to say like work-life balance. I always just call it balance because work is a part of life, right? So it's finding what makes you feel whole, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean you're in that right job and right career or right now. Again, given pressure of the economy, absolutely, you can't turn down 5 jobs and be super picky. But I think it's finding the good in that and what you can use to draw out your strengths and your passion. Maybe there's 7 things you do and one of them you really love, and you don't really enjoy the other 6, but that's okay for now, right? And it's kind of it's kind of finding what your sweet spot is and building on that and focusing on that as you look for like the next role after that. And so yeah, I think that kind of, as you work through and kind of develop your career and your journey, I think this has been a lot of great advice around that. I think that we talked a lot about skills and strengths. One of the questions in the chat is, how do we assess a candidate's soft skills, such as communication, collaboration, and adaptability? Latoya, do you want to answer that one?
Oh no, sorry, somebody was walking past my glass. I was like trying not to look. I was like, hi, I'm on a call. I'd be happy to. But yeah, I was going to say, with interviews, the way we have, well, at least at Dominion, and I'm sure this is the same, we develop questions that really kind of go to whatever the competency that is. So, collaboration. So we'll have, and of course, depending on the role and kind of what they'll be doing, we kind of just, build questions around that and kind of rank, use, our kind of internal ranking system or assessment. But it really is around, can you, and Kelsey pointed to this earlier, and one of the questions where, really providing very specific examples is very helpful, right? So if you're trying to get a indication if somebody collaborates very well, or what is their communication, or other soft skills, if you have a very specific question that requires a very specific example of how that might happen, how have you worked effectively with teams, give an example of working with large groups, or whatever the case may be. And of course, one answer, it's hard to gauge fully with one answer, but it does give you insight into how they're thinking about what does collaboration even mean, or what is effective communication. So that's kind of a way that we, look, but it really does vary depending on the role, especially, those that might have higher degrees of collaboration or require more of those interactions. So yeah, I would say it's more of having specific examples of those.
I usually ask candidates about their early life. And a lot of them are very surprised by that I spend so much time talking to them about where they grew up, what their parents did, what their brothers and sisters do. But it gives you insight into sort of where a person came from, and what they've done from their earliest years in terms of developing their career and understanding themselves. And once you have a kind of a little bit of an understanding of the environment in which they grew up, everything kind of builds from there in terms of being able to assess for soft skills and understanding where there might be areas for development, as well as where they spike in terms of their their interpersonal skills and the normal things, team building, strategic clarity, things like that. Kelsey?
Yeah, I would say, kind of piggybacking off both those, it's going to come up in the interview process. So any interview, no matter what kind of role it's for, the interviewer is going to probe to ask about your ability to communicate or team with others. So I would recommend having some pre-canned answers to kind of those scenarios when they come your way. Don't sound scripted, but think through it in advance and rehearse it. Latoya made a great point about wanting the candidate who's interviewing to share with you as the interviewer very specific examples. And I think a good way to structure your responses in that situation is it's an acronym, SAR. It's the one there's different versions of this, but the idea of being able to convey the situation you were in, the S, the action you took during that situation, the A, and then the R being the results that your actions led to. How did you influence it? So preparing a response to kind of soft skills type questions, thinking about the S, the A, and the R for how you would respond. I think just those come out during the interview pretty typically.
I love that. And it's funny, as I think about the soft skills versus like the harder tech skills, for an entry-level candidate coming right out of college, I'd much rather have a person that's stronger in soft skills than in tech skills, because you can teach that. Yep. So there's no expectation on having, 4 4 different programming languages. I'd rather have someone that can, is a good communicator, loves group work, loves collaboration, is a great speaker, than I would that knows like 4 programming languages already. So just, something to think about and practice as. I think William & Mary being a liberal arts college is amazing because that's not the pure focus of tech. But I think having that blend, I feel like everyone that comes out of William & Mary is very well rounded, I think. And so everyone has a leg up already from that perspective, because you're not just focused on this one lane. You have this diverse background of education, which I think is really important. One other question in the chat is, we talked a little bit about the fact of building your own personal board of directors. So the question is, what recommendations can be shared? Who should be included? What do you look for? Why? Does anyone have an example of how they've built their own personal board of directors?
Latoya?
I think Kelsey described her board of directors, so I'd be interested.
I can elaborate on this, but I think leaning back into that thought of like a coach, a sponsor, and a mentor. And then I always appreciate having a peer in my board of directors, so someone who's a comparable peer manager, whether it's to talk through. As a people manager, I may have questions about the team I'm leading, someone who may have seen a similar situation on their team. So I look for a peer, then obviously look for someone maybe in the role you want to be in, or the growth opportunity that you want to see yourself move into. And that oftentimes maybe is a sponsor, because they have the influence, they're maybe more senior in their career journey. And then honestly, I have mentee and mentor relationships, and I learn as much from those mentees as they learn from, I feel like sometimes I offer value to them. So I consider my mentees as part of my board of directors. Like, they have a totally different perspective on things. So across levels, someone more senior, someone more junior, and someone at a peer level, I think is a good place to consider as you build a board of directors.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think that's exactly spot on with what I would say as well. And I think there was also a part of the question on who would you not include. I think that kind of can depend. I know some people look to family members or others for advice. Not to say that I wouldn't include them as, one of, but it really just depends, right? So when I think my mom is on my board of directors, and that comes with kind of a combination of her professional experience in a totally different industry. She was in the finance industry for many years before she retired. But she has gone through a lot of these scenarios and these experiences. So she just happens to be my mom, but she has those. But the combination of her being my mom and knowing me, because again, going back to sometimes you don't see in yourself, or maybe you're not thinking, and you want maybe someone that you can be a little bit more vulnerable with, that maybe knows you a little bit more deeply. So in that case, it's my mom. And obviously it could be a spouse, it could be a cousin, it could be, a friend. But I do caution, if it's a friend, make sure that it's somebody that is willing to give you feedback.
Right.
Often, we surround ourselves by people that maybe want to make us feel good and don't want to hurt our feelings. So I think where you're using that, if it is a friend or someone else, it's someone that will give you some constructive criticism or some, constructive thoughts to help you along the way.
In my experience, at least at Korn Ferry, was we had a formal mentor program. And all the new people joining the firm had a designated mentor, who I still keep in touch with today. It's 15 years since I joined, and so you would count him on your board of directors. And some of the people that I've brought into the business, and that I've helped along the way, are still people that I even though one is now the CEO of a search firm, another one is a partner with another firm in Dallas. A couple of them are working with me here. Those are people that I turn to for advice, because they know me very well, and they know all of my strengths and most of my weaknesses. And you make sure that the feedback that you receive upwards is received graciously, and you don't want to be argumentative about it. You want to seek to improve, and then the feedback that comes from from the board, so to speak, that are things that you really need to pay attention to, because those are people that have your best interest in mind, and want to see you be able to develop successfully.
I love, as I was developing my personal board of directors, I thought about strategic relationships. And if I want this next position in this role, and I don't have a relationship with someone that's going to be a decision maker in that process, what better way to get them to know me than to kind of ask them to help me, think through that position, be my mentor, and approach it that way. So I think, also thinking strategically about where you want to move in your career. And if there's like 4 or 5 people that are giving input to that, how do they play into that relationship? I think that's really important. And I think that, a bunch of people mentioned, you don't want everyone that's going to be like, oh, great idea, you're just great. You want the hard feedback. And I don't want people that are just like me in similar roles. I want to get like I love when people really make me think. Or, every day it's like, I'm like, God, I would have never thought of that, to ask that question. I would have never thought of that. Right. And so I'm always like inspired and moved by people that I work with, because I'm like, wow, like, I'm so glad I have this diversity on my team of both in person and in thought. And it's amazing because you just bring out these ideas. So I'd say make sure your board is diverse as well, to give you that best input.
And make sure you're willing to serve on other people's board.
Yeah.
Because it's really reciprocal and people help one another.
Absolutely.
So
I know we have about 15 minutes left, and I will take some more questions too. I guess what I'll ask the panel to, kind of the last question here that I'll throw out there is, what's the best career advice you've ever received? You might have to think a few minutes, but is there anything that kind of sticks out? And it can be multiple things for multiple people.
For me, it wasn't told to me. I kind of learned it. And it may not, it's applicable. And that's to find one thing that you really love doing, and do it really, really well, with all of the opportunities that are open to you, or to people, finding a kind of a vein of things that you enjoy in terms of work that you really enjoy doing, and just focusing on continuing year after year, to build on that. That's the singular advice that I've received, or that I've fashioned, that's helped me. Latoya, Kelsey?
Sure. I'll just say quickly that mine, it was probably around that time when I was kind of making the decision to do that missionary trip to Niger. So I remember going to the partner that I was assigned to at the firm, and I was terrified, because I was like, who's ever left to do this, and he's not going to understand. And I had already had a conversation with one of my mentors who also happened to be at the firm, and she made me feel a little bit better, because she wasn't, she didn't tell me I was crazy, but she felt like this is something you're passionate about. But still, I just felt like his perspective might be different. He'd been there for like 30 years, very great reputation, and I was the associate that was assigned to him. So I just felt like, this might be kind of, I don't want it to look like a ding on him, like something he's doing. And I really want him to respect me and the decision that I'm making. And because I did know that I wanted to go back ultimately. So I went to him, and he gave me the best advice that I've just carried on. And that is, he said, Latoya, he's like, if I could do it all over again, I would do, maybe not the exact same thing you're doing, but I would take this time kind of earlier in your career, or like switching, opportunities, learning more about what you love, continuing to do the things you're passionate, even if it is stopping at this juncture and then maybe doing something different. But it was also around like vacation and taking the time. So whether it's a sabbatical, a missionary trip, planning your vacations. He was like, the first 2 years at the firm, I didn't take a vacation. He was like, do you know who cared? No one. He said, I was the only one who knew I didn't take a vacation. He was like, so just, make sure that you're thinking about your self-care, the things that, keep you going, in the future, you want to have a family, all of those things, you cannot be any good to your family if you are not mentally, physically, emotionally, all of that stuff together. So I literally, even in my role right now, I tell my team on every staff meeting, I have vacation on the agenda, because I want people to be thinking about ahead. Don't wait until December to try to squeeze in all your vacation. Like, try to spread it throughout the year for your own self, and really for the team, because we're all better when everyone is better. So that advice has really carried, and all of those, topics have carried throughout all of my career.
Awesome. I think just to throw mine in, I think the best advice I received is to set clear goals for my career. So have a vision of what I want to achieve, but be flexible on how I achieve it. So don't have such a rigid roadmap that I can't flex and adapt. So for example, I've always had the goal of becoming a people manager, something I wanted to do. And now that I'm doing it, I love it. But I was very flexible on the role and assignment that got me the opportunity to do this. So that's how I found my way out of like working with early career talent into more of the alumni space, because I was like, I want to check the box of people managing. So I was able to kind of bend a little bit and have flexibility. So I'd say set a goal, but be able to bend on how you meet that goal.
I love it. Mine, I've kind of shared my like what's get lost, what are you doing, lose track of time, but I'm one of the quotes I keep on my desk and I always look at. I'm a big Aerosmith fan. And the quote is from a song. It's called Get a Grip. It says, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And for me, that's continued reminder to push myself. Because it's easy for us to get complacent. We don't like change, but being uncomfortable is how we grow. And remember, we don't want to change ourselves. We want to grow ourselves. So it's like, keep on pushing for that growth, which I think is important. There were a few more questions. I know, Nicole, you asked about advice for someone who's recently been laid off and how to kind of look for that next job. And I'd say, summarizing kind of what we've all said too, it's finding what's in front of you and not necessarily, and using your network. I'd say like you have this alumni network, you have this network here, use people, I feel like most people that get jobs have some type of connection, where you're just not going to send your resume in and it's going to go in 1,000 resumes and they're going to find you, right? So like, use your career, connect with all of us on LinkedIn, send us your resume, whether to kind of figure out what field you want to be in, what you want to do, connect with us. But I'd say networking is absolutely number one on my mind. I don't know if others feel that way, but that would be my one piece of advice, would be the networking.
Yeah. Network. It's weird. It's awkward. It's hard, but people want to help you, like, especially William & Mary tribe members. We all want to help each other. So you have that natural in with us and other alumni already. And I remind myself too, it's not a one-sided conversation. You're not just asking for help and taking from a connection in your network. You have stuff to offer them too. So think about when you're wanting to network with somebody, think about what you can bring to them. So it makes networking a little less awkward in that regard. Yeah, network for sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Latoya. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to quickly say, I know at times, and I think I might have seen as a part of one of the questions, just about like different personality types, introverts, extroverts, and just, it being uncomfortable for some people to just kind of take that step and maybe reach out or attend networking events that with more social environments that might be uncomfortable. And I would just say, do what works best for you. I encourage people, if you see someone that's in a role or an area on LinkedIn or has a connection, through LinkedIn, through whether it's alumni or something else, send them a message. And you can start with conversations. You can start, it doesn't have to be jumping in and going to every black tie event or, those types of opportunities, but, do try to, increasingly just connect with more people. And I think just building that network, as has already been said, but you can do it in a way that doesn't really compromise who you are as a person or change, like Kristen said, you want to remain who you are, but there might be discomfort that's involved in that. You just have to, still do it in your own way that is a comfortable pace to network.
Yeah, one of the things that when I was getting into search, there were no real there were conferences and things like that you could attend, but what I wound up doing is with a couple of other people that had graduated from Wharton Business School and were in aerospace, we started our own affinity organization called the Wharton Aerospace Forum, and it's now grown to where there are 400 or 500 people every year that attend, and we get leaders to speak from the Northrop Grumman and Lockheed and BAE Systems and places like that on areas that are of interest. And so we created our own networking event essentially. And it's helped tremendously because, people want to be able to go to a conference where they're, covering topics that are of interest. And also the social aspects of it are very, very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, we're all here. I think that, we were all talking, the panel was talking earlier, I feel like if I get a resume from William & Mary, it gets different treatment than a resume from
different treatment. It does.
Right. So it's definitely use us as a network, and you'll find more people to connect with, even in your industry. I think that anyone's willing to reach out and have a conversation because you have that alumni network and that connection, even if you didn't go to William & Mary, right? But just kind of make the time, show interest, and you'll be surprised at what you get back. And I think it is a little more work, right? Being virtual, but if you're in the DC area, I work in Arlington. A lot of us work around the area. If you're like, hey, let's meet for coffee or let's chat, let us know how we can help you too. We want to be successful. And I've never turned anyone's ever sent me a note to say, hey, I'd love to meet or have a video call. I've never turned them down. So I'm happy to network and engage. Awesome questions.
Are there others in the queue, Kristen?
I don't see any right now.
I believe you covered everything that was sent through the chat and the Q&A and everything I would hope to draft from the beginning. So we want to take a minute to thank all of our panelists for their time and their talent today and sharing their advice with the whole William & Mary community. I've definitely taken a lot of notes today, so I'm sure everyone else has as well. We really appreciate you putting in the effort to prepare your remarks for today and share your time. To all the participants on today's webinar, we expect that you have learned some new strategies for creating your path and developing your network and your own personal board of directors. For those of you that were curious about externing and shadowing, if you weren't aware, the Office of Career Development and Professional Engagement does host an annual winter break extern program. We'd love to grow our network of extern hosts, so alumni and family members who are on the call today. If you are in an opportunity to host an extern, we've had everything from orthopedic surgeons to mental health counselors and someone from 1-800-Flowers, I believe, at one point. So it ranges all industries and across the country. And for current students on the call, these are opportunities for you to shadow for a day or two during your winter break. I'm also going to share a link in the chat for our career exploration page, since there was a lot of discussion around values, interests, personalities, and skills. We have several inventories and assessments that you can take advantage of, both faculty, staff, students, and alumni. Many of these are free to access. You just have to have, some you do have to have a William & Mary email account, but others are free on the resource and just self-reflection exercises for you to do. So we'd love you to take advantage of those resources. As Michael mentioned at the beginning of the session, throughout this week, we are incorporating the NACE career competencies, and today's focus has been heavily on career and self-development, professionalism, and critical thinking, a little bit of communication thrown in there as well. You can find a full list of the competency connections to the learning on the learning objectives page of the Professional Development Week full website, as well as linked in your follow-up emails that you'll receive this week and next. When the meeting closes, as well as in the chat right now, you'll see you'll have access to a quick survey so you can share your perspective on today's session. And we also want to make sure that you take some time for yourself to highlight some of the new information and strategies that you've learned. And right now, today, write down 1 to 3 action steps for yourself to follow up and to continue with your own professional development. This afternoon, we have a great workshop that's going to continue with the theme of values. We have a values-based job search workshop with another alum in the William & Mary community. And you can still register for this session and receive the Zoom link on the full event website. You can also take a look at the full schedule for the rest of the week on that site. And I want to draw special attention to the final event of the week, which is our open networking hour. This is one-on-one virtual networking that is Friday, March 3rd at noon. So while you've been taking the opportunity to learn from the William & Mary community, why don't you also take advantage of connecting one-on-one with members of the William & Mary community? So thank you so much, and you can still register for each of those sessions. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.